We are taught from a very young age that enduring difficult people is somehow this fundamental virtue.
Right. It's practically wired into us.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
we grow up hearing all these maxims. Patience is a virtue. Turn the other cheek. Take the high road.
Just be the bigger person.
Yes. We are completely conditioned to believe that having endless patience for someone who constantly, relentlessly tests it is a sign of moral superiority. We celebrate the peacemakers.
We do. We applaud the people who can just absorb the shock of everyone else's bad behavior without complaining.
Right. But, exploring the concepts we are unpacking today, I just couldn't stop thinking about the reality of that narrative. I mean, at what point does enduring a difficult person cross the line from a noble virtue into, well, a complete and utter sacrifice of your own sanity?
That is the big question.
Yeah. At what cost are we actually keeping the peace?
It is a really profound shift in perspective, and honestly, it is a necessary one because we naturally want to be resilient, right?
Right.
We want to be understanding and empathetic to the struggles of the people around us.
Sure. You don't want to just give up on people.
Exactly. But there is a massive and often totally invisible difference between being a supportive friend or family member and, offering yourself up as collateral damage to someone else's dysfunction.
That's a great way to put it, collateral damage.
Yeah, societally, we have really blurred the line between healthy compromise and what is essentially emotional self-harm.
And that blurred line is exactly why we are here today. So welcome to the deep dive. To the learner listening right now, whether you are prepping for a super stressful family gathering, navigating a chaotic workplace, or just intensely curious about the darker corners of human behavior, our mission today is singular.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We are going to figure out what it actually takes to own your power in the face of toxic relationships, emotional manipulation, and, covert bullying.
It's so prevalent.
It is. So we are going to help you recognize the invisible wounds you might be carrying, decode the incredibly frustrating passive-aggressive behavior of the people around you, and figure out how to build truly impenetrable boundaries. Okay, let's unpack this.
So when you really analyze the landscape of toxic relationships, whether we are talking about, say, a coworker who is subtly trying to sabotage you, a digital bully weaponizing social media, or even deeply rooted multi-generational family dysfunction.
Which is the hardest one, usually.
Oh, absolutely. But they all ultimately revolve around one core concept. It is a battle for a person's sense of reality and their self-worth.
Wow. A battle for reality.
Yes. That is the common denominator of all emotional manipulation. It's about someone trying to systematically dismantle your trust in your own mind, your own memories, and your own value.
Yeah.
And they do that so they can completely control the narrative of the relationship.
Which brings us to what I think is the most insidious part of this whole dynamic, because to fight an enemy, you first have to be able to see it, right?
Right.
Like if you get into a physical altercation, the damage is undeniable. There are bruises, there are broken bones. You can literally go to a doctor, put on a cast, point to it, and say to the world, look, this is where I was hurt. This is what they did to me.
The evidence is right there.
Exactly. But the toxicity we are exploring today leaves absolutely no physical trace. It makes it incredibly hard to identify for yourself, let alone, prove it to anyone else who might be watching from the outside.
And that invisibility is precisely what makes emotional abuse and manipulation so devastatingly effective. I mean, it thrives in the shadows of ambiguity.
Because you constantly second-guess yourself.
Always. So we really should define the parameters of what we're actually talking about here. Emotional manipulation is when someone deliberately uses your feelings, your vulnerabilities, or your deep-seated values against you to control your behavior, your decisions, or your perception of reality.
Okay, so that's manipulation. What about abuse?
Well, emotional abuse takes that manipulation and turns it into a sustained chronic pattern. It isn't just a one-off argument where someone, fights dirty in the heat of the moment.
Right, because we all mess up sometimes.
Exactly. Abuse is a meticulously crafted atmosphere. It's designed to control, diminish, and completely strip you of your autonomy over time.
It is literally like looking at a playbook of psychological warfare. Let's dig into some of these tactics, starting with the one that feels the most utterly destabilizing: gaslighting.
Yes, gaslighting.
The term gets thrown around a lot on the internet these days, almost to the point of losing its meaning, but at its core, this is where a manipulator outright denies things that factually happen. They make you fundamentally question your own memory and your own sanity.
Right. And the phrase actually originates from the 1938 play Gaslight, where a husband slowly dims the gas lights in the house, and then when his wife points it out, he tells her she is just imagining the darkness.
It's so creepy.
It's terrifying. In practice today, it sounds like, "I never said that," or "you're remembering it wrong," or the classic, "you're acting crazy." It is a direct assault on your cognitive reality.
Yeah.
The goal is to make you so unsure of your own perceptions that you have to rely entirely on the abuser's version of reality.
I was trying to wrap my head around how that actually feels in the moment, and the best analogy I could come up with is like a corrupted computer file.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Imagine someone hacks into your system, secretly deletes or alters your most important documents, and then stands right behind your chair, convincing you that your own hard drive is completely broken.
Yes,
You start doubting your own hardware. You think, wow, my memory must be failing, when in reality, there is a hacker in the system.
that is a phenomenal analogy.
Yeah.
You stop trusting your own operating system.
Mm.
And from a psychological standpoint, once a manipulator has you doubting your own memory, once they have bypassed your firewall, so to speak, every other tactic they use becomes exponentially easier to deploy.
Because you've got no defense left.
Exactly. Because if you can't trust your own mind, how can you trust your judgment when they use something like the silent treatment?
Ugh, the silent treatment is brutal.
It is. And the silent treatment isn't just someone needing space to cool down after a fight. That's a boundary. The silent treatment is the deliberate withholding of communication and affection as a punitive measure.
It's a punishment. And it hurts in a way that is really hard to articulate. Like, why does being ignored feel so uniquely agonizing?
Well, it comes down to evolutionary biology. Neuroimaging studies have actually shown that the brain processes social rejection and isolation in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It means it's the exact same part of the brain that processes physical pain.
Wait, really? It literally registers as physical pain?
Yes. To our ancient ancestors, being isolated from the tribes meant literal death. You couldn't survive alone. So when a toxic person gives you the silent treatment, your brain perceives it as an existential threat. It hurts physically.
That is mind-blowing. It literally triggers a biological survival response.
It does.
And as if that's not enough to deal with, you're also facing things like moving the goalposts. You bend over backwards to do exactly what they ask, and the second you achieve it, suddenly the rules change.
It's exhausting.
Right. No matter what you do, you are always failing. And then you add to that the tactic of playing the victim. I mean, you can confront them about something terrible they did to you, and somehow, through this dizzying maze of deflection, you end up apologizing to them by the end of the conversation.
It is a masterclass in the reversal of accountability. And this is often paired with constant microscopic criticism.
Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Precisely. It isn't just big, explosive arguments. It's a slow drip of disdain. The way you load the dishwasher is wrong. Your career ambitions are unrealistic. Your friends are annoying. Over time, that constant criticism, combined with blame shifting, where every bad thing they do is framed as a reaction to something you allegedly did, it just starts to erode your identity.
And while all this is happening, they are often employing isolation, right? Slowly, methodically cutting you off from the friends and family who might actually point out how crazy this all is.
Yes, because they need to become the sole narrator of your life.
Right. And sometimes it crosses into explicit control, like monitoring your phone, restricting access to finances, or using pure intimidation. And not necessarily holding a weapon, but threatening to ruin your reputation, or expose a deeply held secret, or take the kids if you step out of line. It creates this suffocating atmosphere of complete unpredictability.
We really need to pause on that word, unpredictability. Because if we want to understand how these tactics break a person down, we have to look at the nervous system.
Okay, let's look at it.
The psychological toll of constantly walking on eggshells is immense. When you never know which version of this person is going to walk through the front door, the loving, charismatic partner or the cruel, vindictive critic, your brain cannot relax.
I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Always. You live in a state of hyperarousal. Your body is constantly pumping cortisol, the stress hormone, preparing for the next attack. Living in chronic low-grade anxiety like that is exhausting.
I can imagine.
And when a human being is exhausted, when they are sleep-deprived and emotionally drained, they are incredibly easy to control. The manipulators isn't just winning arguments. They are actively draining your biological battery.
Wow. Okay, I have to push back on one of the concepts here, though, because it feels like a very fine line to me.
Sure.
So one of the major warning signs of manipulation we see in the sources is love bombing. This is described as excessive attention, lavish gifts, and, intense affection very early on in a relationship.
Yes.
But wait, isn't love bombing sometimes just someone being an incredibly hopeless romantic? Like, what if they are just genuinely thrilled to have met you and want to sweep you off your feet? How on earth do you tell the difference between a hopeless romantic in the honeymoon throes and a toxic manipulator setting a trap?
That is probably the most common point of confusion when people start learning about emotional abuse. And it is a critical distinction to make. The difference does not lie in the flowers or the compliments themselves. It lies in the pace, the intensity, and crucially, the response to boundaries.
Okay, the response to boundaries. Give me an example.
So, a hopeless romantic might bring you a lavish gift and want to spend every waking moment with you. But if you say, hey, I'm really exhausted tonight, I just need an evening to myself to decompress, the romantic says, I totally understand. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow.
Right. They respect the no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The manipulator, the love bomber, hears that exact same boundary and views it as an insult and a threat. They push back. They pout, they guilt trip, they manipulate. They'll say, but I bought these expensive tickets for us, or I just love you so much, I literally can't stand to be apart from you for one night, or are you pushing me away?
Oh, wow. That feels very different.
It is. The excessive affection from a love bomber isn't about celebrating who you are. It is a down payment on future control.
A down payment on future control.
Yes. They want to indebt you to them so intensely and entangle your lives so quickly that by the time the mask finally slips and the abuse begins, you feel psychologically and socially obligated to stay.
That completely reframes the entire honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
So if we now understand the mechanics of how this manipulation works, the gaslighting, the silent treatment, the exhaustion, we naturally have to ask why people do this. What is the motive?
Right.
And I think the assumption is always that it's a classic Machiavellian thirst for power. But the sources show it's not always about power. Sometimes it is driven by something much darker and surprisingly petty. It's this twisted form of jealousy known as malignant envy.
Malignant envy is arguably one of the most destructive and misunderstood drivers of toxic behavior.
Tell me more about that.
Well, to understand it, we have to separate it from normal envy. Normal envy is a universal human emotion. It is simply the acknowledgement of a desire. You see your friend buy a beautiful house and you think, wow, I wish I had a house like that.
Yeah, which is pretty normal.
It's totally normal. It can actually be motivating. It highlights what you want in life. But malignant envy is a completely different beast. It doesn't say, I wish I had what you have. It says, if I cannot have it, I will destroy it. Or better yet, I will destroy you for having it.
That is so dark. The best way I can visualize the difference is by looking at, military tactics.
Like,
Normal envy is wanting the enemy's fertile farmland so you can grow your own crops. You want what they have.
right.
But malignant envy is a scorched earth tactic. You don't even want the farmland anymore. You just want to burn the crops to the ground, poison the wells, and salt the earth so that absolutely no one gets to eat.
That is a very grim but very accurate picture.
Here's where it gets really interesting with an everyday analogy. Normal envy is wishing you had a slice of someone's delicious pie. Malignant envy is throwing their entire pie on the floor and stomping on it so no one gets to eat. It is purely, irrationally destructive.
And what's fascinating here is, and honestly deeply tragic, is the underlying psychology of projection. When a toxic person is consumed by malignant envy, your success does not just represent your hard work. To them, your success is a blinding spotlight exposing their own perceived inadequacy.
Oh, I see.
If you get a promotion, it reminds them that their career has stagnated. If you find a healthy, loving relationship, it holds up a mirror to their own dysfunction and loneliness.
So it's not even really about you.
No. Your mere existence, if you are thriving, is an existential threat to their fragile ego. Because they lack the emotional maturity to handle their own internal deficit, they project that pain outward, they attack. But because outright unprovoked aggression is socially unacceptable, they disguise that attack. They frame it as healthy competition, or playing devil's advocate, or just being brutally honest.
I'm just keeping it real.
Exactly.
And it manifests in these incredibly subtle, passive-aggressive ways that make you feel like you are losing your mind, like backhanded
Oh,
compliments.
those are classic.
Right. You excitedly tell a coworker you got the promotion, and they say, wow, congratulations. I guess management was really desperate to fill that role. It is praise with a venomous little sting attached at the very end.
It's designed to puncture your joy.
Yeah.
It allows the envious person to diminish your accomplishment while simultaneously maintaining the social facade of being a supportive colleague or friend. If you get upset, they can simply retreat into, "What? I said congratulations, you're so sensitive."
It's so maddening. Then there's the relentless cycle of copying, followed immediately by competing. They will mimic your style, your hobbies, or your work projects, but then they immediately try to outperform you, or even claim they actually originated the idea.
Yeah.
And if they can't outperform you, they resort to spreading rumors. They will actively attack your good reputation.
Reputation destruction is the primary tool of the envious. If they cannot elevate themselves to your level, the only way to balance the psychological scales is to drag you down to theirs. If they can plant seeds of doubt in the minds of others about your integrity, your competence, or your character, they falsely elevate their own status within the social group.
Which naturally leads to exclusion. They start leaving you off calendar invites or, forgetting to add you to the group chat or organizing social events without you.
Right.
They also love to minimize your achievements. You hit a massive life-changing goal and they shrug and say, well, anyone could have done that with the resources you had, or you just got lucky.
Anything to devalue it.
But I think the manifestation that cuts the absolute deepest is the sudden, inexplicable coldness after a major milestone.
That one is tough.
You have a friend who is perfectly warm and supportive right up until the day you announce your engagement or you finally lose that weight or you buy your dream home. And then abruptly, it's like a freezer door shuts. The warmth is just gone.
That sudden coldness is often the most heartbreaking for the target because it feels like a profound betrayal. But the crucial takeaway here, and this is something anyone dealing with a toxic person needs to internalize, is that this behavior is never, ever about you being too much.
You're not the problem.
No. You being successful or happy or vibrant is not the problem. The bullying, the backhanded compliments, the coldness, they were entirely about the bully's internal emptiness. They literally cannot tolerate the reflection in the mirror that your success holds up to their stagnation.
Wow. So, if malignant envy is the twisted motive, it feels like the modern era has handed these people the ultimate weapon. We are moving from why they attack to how they execute these attacks publicly, often without facing any real consequences. And that brings us to the phenomenon of vague booking.
Vague booking.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate digital dagger of passive-aggressive behavior.
It really is.
By definition, it is the act of posting cryptic, highly emotionally charged messages on social media that are very clearly directed at a specific individual, but the poster deliberately omits the person's name.
We have all seen these posts. Like, it's the Facebook status that says, some people really show their true colors when things get tough. You know who you are.
Yes.
Or the Instagram story with just a black background and a tiny dramatic done with an eye roll emoji. It is the exact digital equivalent of standing in a crowded room and talking really, really loudly about someone while pretending you're having a private conversation.
That's exactly what it is.
The mutual friends reading the post know exactly who it is about. The target absolutely knows it is about them. And that is the entire point.
The mechanics of vague booking rely entirely on plausible deniability. It is a highly cowardly tactic. It weaponizes the panopticon of social media to turn a private interpersonal conflict into a public spectacle.
Right.
The vague booker is essentially rallying public opinion, gathering sympathy, likes, and comments, the what happened, DM me crowd, while completely stripping the target of their right to defend themselves. Because if you're not explicitly named in the post, how can you defend yourself?
You can't. If you comment and say, hey, is this about me? You instantly look paranoid, guilty, and crazy. The vague booker has successfully trapped you.
Precisely.
Okay, I am going to play devil's advocate for a second here because this is a very common defense. Isn't vague booking sometimes just harmless venting? I mean, life is frustrating. People get angry. Don't we all have those moments where we've had a terrible day, someone betrayed us, and we just want to blow off some steam online without dragging specific names through the mud and starting a lawsuit?
It is a fair question, but we really have to look at the intent and the outcome. Vague booking is never just venting.
It's not.
No. Healthy venting is a private act. It is calling a trusted friend, going for a walk, and seeking support or perspective in a safe space. Vague booking is performing your victimhood for an audience while simultaneously throwing a rock and hiding your hand.
Performing your victimhood.
Wow. The damage it causes to the target is immense and very real. First, it creates intense hypervigilance. The target starts obsessively scanning every post, every story, thinking, is this new meme about me? Is that quote directed at me?
It hacks your nervous system all over again.
Exactly.
And it causes incredible social isolation because mutual friends see the post, they know the drama is brewing, and they are forced to either silently pick sides or just back away from both of you entirely to avoid getting caught in the crossfire.
Precisely. It breeds profound self-doubt, and it causes legitimate reputation damage. Even without a name attached, the implication reaches the social circle. The perception that you have done something terrible, that you have shown your true colors, becomes reality in the minds of the audience long before you ever get a chance to speak your truth.
That's awful.
It is a relentless, exhausting form of public humiliation designed to punish you without leaving fingerprints.
It's so insidious because it's a game you cannot win if you play by their rules. But what happens when the person playing these games, the gaslighter, the envious bully, the vague booker, isn't just a bitter coworker or an acquaintance on the internet?
That's where it gets truly complicated.
Right. What happens when the call is coming from inside the house? This brings us to what I think is the ultimate betrayal, the hardest arena of all navigating toxic family dynamics.
The family unit is uniquely difficult because it is bound by intense, systemic societal pressure. From the moment we are born, culture constantly reinforces the narrative that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, and that you must honor your parents and siblings above all else.
Yeah, that pressure is everywhere.
And that cultural conditioning is so deeply ingrained that it makes it incredibly difficult, almost taboo, to even acknowledge when a family member is fundamentally toxic. When someone who shares your DNA is actively undermining your emotional well-being, gaslighting your reality, or constantly creating chaos, you feel immense guilt just for noticing it. You feel like you are breaking a sacred societal rule.
But families are just collections of flawed human beings, and sometimes those flaws calcify into deeply destructive roles. Instead of just listing them out, let's imagine a typical high-stress family gathering, like a Thanksgiving dinner.
Good idea.
You can see these profiles in action.
Let's look at the dysfunctional family system in practice.
Right. So you sit down at the table, and immediately you hear from the critic.
Oh, yes, the critic.
You bring out a dish you spent 3 hours cooking, and the critic tastes it and says, well, it's good, but it's a little dry. Not like the one I made last year.
Classic.
For them, nothing you do is ever quite good enough. They hyper-focus on your flaws, your weight, your career choices, and completely minimize your achievements.
And sitting next to the critic is the controller. The controller views the family not as a unit of equals, but as a hierarchy that they must absolutely dominate. They demand absolute obedience.
You need to run the show.
If you decide to spend the holiday with your in-laws instead, the controller will use money, guilt, or the threat of emotional withdrawal to force you back into line. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me.
Then, down at the end of the table, you have the victim. In their narrative of the world, they have zero agency. Everything is always happening to them.
Yes, the perpetual martyr.
If you attempt to set a healthy boundary saying something like, please don't speak to my spouse that way, the victim doesn't apologize. They burst into tears and say, everyone is always attacking me. I can't do anything right. Your boundary is instantly reframed as an aggressive attack on them.
They're waiting in the wings to text everyone about that exact interaction is the gossip.
Every family has one.
Every single one. The gossip thrives on chaos. They view your private, vulnerable information as currency. You confide in them about a marital struggle, and by the end of the week, the entire extended family knows. They manufacture conflict to create alliances and keep the drama churning.
And finally, when the dinner is over and you try to bring up how hurtful the whole night was, you encounter the denier.
The ultimate gaslighter.
Yes. I have no idea what you're talking about. Dinner was lovely. You are just always looking for something to be upset about. They completely refuse to acknowledge any harm they've caused, essentially erasing your reality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows how societal expectations weaponize our loyalty.
That's a strong phrase. Weaponize our loyalty.
But here is the million-dollar question for the learner who is listening right now, thinking about their own mother or brother or father. How do you actually distinguish between a family member who is just going through a genuinely cranky, difficult phase in life? Maybe they are under immense stress at work or dealing with chronic pain versus someone who is fundamentally, characterologically, the critic or the controller.
That is the pivotal question that determines whether a relationship can be repaired or if boundaries must be built.
So how do we know?
Well, based on the sources, the difference lies in 3 things: the pattern, the intent, and the response to feedback. Let's be clear. Everyone has bad days. Everyone snaps. Everyone gets defensive sometimes.
We're all human.
Right. But A healthy family member who is just going through a hard time possesses the capacity for genuine remorse. If you go to them the next day and say, hey, the way you criticized me at dinner really hurt, a healthy person will take a breath and say, you know what? You're right. I am so stressed about work right now, but I shouldn't have taken it out on you. I am sorry.
That accountability is key. A toxic family member, a fundamental critic or deny, lacks that internal capacity for self-reflection. When confronted with their bad behavior, they will escalate the conflict, deflect the blame back onto you, or actively punish you for daring to bring it up.
They double down.
Always. The core realization we have to embrace is this: love should never, ever require the sacrifice of your mental health, your physical safety, or your core sense of self. If a family relationship demands that you constantly shrink yourself, bite your tongue, and endure abuse just to survive it, it is toxic.
Love should never require the sacrifice of your mental health. That is such a powerful permission slip for anyone listening who has been carrying the weight of a toxic family.
It's hard to accept, but it's true.
But what happens when the toxicity isn't originating inside the family? What happens when the family is actually pretty healthy, but the outside world starts bleeding into the home? This brings us to the concept of collateral damage.
This is a crucial dynamic that often goes entirely unaddressed. We tend to view bullying or abuse as an individual problem. If a child is bullied at school or a husband is verbally abused by his boss, we think of it as their problem to solve.
Right, like they need to handle it at work or school.
But a family is not just a collection of individuals living under one roof. It is a highly interconnected emotional ecosystem. Bullying is a family issue, regardless of where it takes place. When that child or that parent is relentlessly attacked outside the home, they don't just leave that pain at the front door. They bring that dysregulated nervous system right to the dinner table.
The best way I can visualize this is like secondhand smoke.
Okay.
Imagine someone is forced to sit in a tiny, unventilated room and smoke a pack of cigarettes at work or at school all day. And then they come home, shut the front door, and exhale. Suddenly, the entire family is breathing in those toxic fumes. You can't just ignore the smoke and pretend the air is clean. It is going to affect everyone's lungs.
That is exactly what happens on a psychological level. We refer to this as secondary trauma. The ripple effects through the family ecosystem are profound. You might start seeing siblings suddenly fighting more aggressively because one child's unprocessed pain and anger from school is spilling over into the living room.
Or the parents taking it out on each other.
Exactly. You see spouses emotionally checking out or becoming deeply depressed because the burden of carrying their partner's daily workplace trauma is simply too heavy. The whole family ends up walking on eggshells in their own sanctuary, trying not to trigger the person who is suffering.
So how do you clear the smoke? If the outside world is hostile, how do you rebuild the fortress of the home? The strategies for creating a safe harbor are actually very practical.
We need actionable steps here.
First, you have to actively and intentionally make the home a no-judgment zone. When the person who is bullied finally speaks up, their feelings cannot be dismissed, rationalized, or mocked.
To facilitate that, establishing a routine of openness is key. Implementing a weekly 15-minute family check-in can be transformative. It's simple. Everyone goes around the table and shares one good thing and one hard thing from their week. It normalizes talking about struggle.
I love that idea.
But crucial to this working is the parents modeling vulnerability. If parents pretend they are invincible and never have a bad day, children learn to hide their pain. When a parent appropriately shares, "I had a really frustrating conflict at work today and it made me feel sad," it teaches the child that the home is a safe place for difficult emotions.
And practically speaking, one of the biggest changes a family can make is enforcing phone-free family time, whether that is during dinner or going for a walk together, because if the bullying is happening digitally, smartphones are the Trojan horse.
They really are.
They bring the bullies right into the child's bedroom. You have to physically remove that digital conduit to give their nervous system a break.
That physical break is essential.
But whether we are talking about a child facing cyberbullying, an adult dealing with a toxic workplace, or someone trapped in a relationship with a narcissistic partner, the most common, almost reflexive question you hear from the outside looking in is always, why don't they just leave?
You hear it all the time.
It seems so simple and obvious to an outsider, just walk out the door. But before we can even talk about escaping, we have to fundamentally understand the sheer gravity of the trap.
We must completely reframe how we view people who are stuck in these situations. There is a pervasive, judgmental myth that staying in an emotionally abusive situation makes a victim weak or foolish. It does not make them weak. It makes them human.
Wow.
Leaving an emotionally abusive dynamic is objectively one of the hardest, most dangerous things a human being can do. We have to look at the structural and psychological chains, keeping them tethered to the abuser.
And the thickest, most complex of those chains is something called trauma bonding. This is a term that gets misused a lot as just a synonym for we went through something hard together.
Yes, pop psychology has distorted it.
But true trauma bonding isn't just a psychological quirk. It is a deeply rooted biological and neurochemical reality.
Let's dissect trauma bonding, because understanding the biology of it removes the shame for the victim. A trauma bond is formed through a cyclical pattern of severe abuse, followed by intense affection.
Right.
When an abuser creates a climate of fear, unpredictability, or pain, the victim's brain interprets this as a mortal threat. It floods the body with stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline. The victim is in a state of sheer panic.
Fight or flight mode.
Exactly. Then the abuser suddenly shifts gears. They offer comfort. They apologize profusely. They cry. They offer the intense love bombing we discussed earlier. I'm so sorry. I just love you so much. I'll never do it again.
The honeymoon phase returns.
Yes. When this happens, the victim's brain, desperate for relief from the panic, releases a massive, overwhelming surge of dopamine and oxytocin, the brain's powerful bonding and reward chemicals.
It's like a biochemical roller coaster.
Exactly. And because this cycle repeats over and over, the victim's brain literally becomes wired to seek comfort and safety from the exact same person who is causing the terror. It is an addiction cycle, functioning very similarly to substance abuse in the brain.
That is terrifying.
The victim mistakes this intense, desperate chemical survival bond for profound, once-in-a-lifetime love. They literally feel they cannot survive without the abuser.
That is staggering. The abuser manages to become both the poison and the antidote. And alongside that incredibly powerful trauma bond, there are also highly pragmatic, terrifying traps.
The structural traps.
Right, there's financial dependence. Abusers often methodically take control of the bank accounts, ruin the victim's credit, or sabotage their career, making physical escape seem literally impossible. How do you leave if you can't rent an apartment or buy food?
Then there is fear, paralyzing fear. Fear of the abuser escalating to violence if they try to leave. Fear of a protracted legal battle where they might lose custody of their children. Fear of being utterly alone.
It's overwhelming.
Or the terrifying, very real fear of not being believed by their community, their church, or their own family because the abuser has spent years charming everyone else.
And we can't ignore the heavy, suffocating burden of shame. Victims often work so incredibly hard to hide the reality of the abuse from the outside world. They curate the perfect social media feeds, they smile at parties, they cover for their partner. Admitting the truth means dismantling that entire facade, which feels like a devastating public failure.
And finally, perhaps the most tragic trap of all is hope. The desperate, enduring belief in the abuser's tears and promises that this time, things will truly change.
So what does this all mean for the learner listening right now? The person who might be driving to work, recognizing themselves or someone they love in this exact cycle. How do you actually untangle a chemical trauma bond, a web of fear, and a lifetime of malignant envy?
It takes a toolkit.
Because armed with an understanding of the tactics, the motives, and the traps, we need a unified action plan. How do we synthesize all of this knowledge to help you finally reclaim your autonomy?
The process of owning your power is not a neat, easy checklist. It involves incredible internal friction. It is a battle. But the toolkit for reclaiming your autonomy is highly tactical, and it starts with breaking the cognitive dissonance.
What's the first step?
Step one is naming it and documenting it. You have to break through your own denial and the abuser's gaslighting. You need to say it out loud to yourself. This is emotional abuse. My mother is a controller. My coworker is exhibiting malignant envy.
Say the words out loud.
Yes. And then you start a hidden journal. You document the incidents. You write down the dates, the quotes, the context, even screenshot the vague booking posts.
Keeping receipts.
Exactly. When the abuser tries to gaslight you tomorrow, you have a private written record in black and white. Seeing the pattern written down strips away their power to manipulate your memory.
It anchors you to reality. Step 2 is all about how you actually respond in the moment to manipulators, especially vague bookers and online bullies. The golden rule here is trust your gut and do not take the bait.
Do not engage.
You refuse to engage publicly in their arena. If a toxic person is vague booking about you, the absolute worst thing you can do is comment on the post or launch your own vague counterattack. The strategy is to send them one and only one calm, private message.
Something like, hey, I saw your post. Is there an issue between us that we need to discuss?
Right, because that private message is incredibly powerful. It corners them in reality. Their response will reveal everything you need to know.
It forces their hand.
If they say, no, of course not, you're so paranoid, but they keep posting, you have your answer. They want an audience, not a resolution. You drop the rope and walk away.
Which brings us to step 3, the cornerstone of owning your power, setting boundaries without JADE.
Ah, JE, I love this acronym.
JADE stands for justify, argue, defend, explain. When you try to set a boundary with a toxic person, your natural instinct is to JADE. You want to explain why you are hurt, justify your need for space, and argue your point. You must fight that urge.
Because over-explaining just gives the manipulator ammunition.
Exactly. To a manipulator, your explanation is just a list of vulnerabilities they can attack. When you set a boundary, you state it once, clearly, and you stop talking. You embrace the awkward silence. You state the boundary, and you attach an ironclad consequence.
If you continue to call me names, I will hang up the phone.
Yeah.
And then when they call you a name, you actually have to hang up the phone. Because a boundary without a consequence isn't a boundary, it's just a polite suggestion. It is like installing a bright red stop sign at the busiest intersection in town, but absolutely nobody in the entire city has brakes on their cars.
That's a great image.
It looks nice, but it is totally useless unless there's a physical mechanism to enforce the stop.
This raises an important question, though, which is perhaps the most difficult but most liberating realization about boundaries. Boundaries are not about controlling the toxic person's behavior. The hard truth you have to swallow is that they likely will not change. Their dysfunction is theirs.
You can't fix them.
No. Boundaries are solely 100% about protecting your behavior, your energy, and your physical space. You cannot make them speak kindly to you, but you can dictate whether or not you remain in the room to hear it.
Which flows perfectly into step 4, regulating access. You do not owe anyone your smallness. You need to stop shrinking yourself to make envious people comfortable. You stop dimming your light.
Yes.
And practically, that means limiting their access to your joy and your life. This involves implementing low contact or no contact.
Low contact is often necessary for coworkers or family members you cannot completely avoid. It means putting them on an information diet. You keep conversations entirely surface level. The weather, sports, mild pleasantries.
You gray rock them.
Exactly. You do not offer vulnerable information, and you always enter the interaction with a pre-planned exit strategy.
And then there is no contact. The ultimate boundary. There is a lot of guilt associated with this, but it's vital to understand that going no contact with an abuser or a deeply toxic family member is not a selfish act of punishment.
It's self-preservation.
It is a valid, sometimes necessary last resort for your literal psychological survival. It is cutting the oxygen to the fire.
And finally, step 5, which cannot be overstated, seeking help. You cannot untangle trauma bonds and systemic abuse in isolation. The abuser relies on your silence. Break it.
Tell someone.
Tell one trusted friend what is really happening. If you are dealing with emotional abuse in a relationship, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That number is 1-800-799-7233. And remember, they don't just handle physical violence. They're highly trained to help victims navigate the invisible wounds of emotional and psychological abuse.
That's a huge resource.
Pursue therapy, too. Individual therapy to heal your own trauma bonds, and family therapy to address the secondary trauma infecting your home.
What an incredible, heavy, but ultimately empowering journey we have been on today. We started by shining a light on the invisible psychological wounds of gaslighting and manipulation.
We covered a lot.
We dissected the twisted, scorched earth logic of malignant envy and the cowardly digital dagger of vague booking. We waded through the incredibly complex waters of toxic family dynamics, the secondhand smoke of bullying bleeding into the home, and the intense biological and psychological traps that keep good people stuck in terrible situations.
It's a lot to process.
If there is one ultimate message shining through all of this analysis, it is a reminder to you, the learner. Protecting your peace is not a selfish act. It is the baseline requirement for your survival. Enduring abuse is not a virtue.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a concept that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Yeah.
It is a reality that you will face when you finally implement these tools.
What is that?
When you finally set that massive, immovable boundary, or when you take the terrifying leap to go no contact, you are often left with a sudden, echoing quiet. For months or years, your brain has been filled with the adrenaline-fueled chaos of managing a toxic person's unpredictable emotions.
Right.
When you remove that chaos, what do you do with all that empty space? Who are you when your daily existence is no longer defined by someone else's dysfunction?
Wow.
That quiet can feel terrifying and incredibly lonely at first, but it is the blank canvas where your real autonomous life finally begins.
Who are you when you are no longer defined by someone else's dysfunction? What a profoundly beautiful and challenging thought to end on. Remember, you do not have to endure toxicity as a badge of honor. Your sanity, your joy, and your power are worth infinitely more than their comfort. Thank you to the learner for joining us on this incredibly important deep dive. Stay curious, own your power, and make sure you are aggressively surrounding yourself with people who cheer loudly for your wins. We'll catch you next time.